Welcome back to The Delineation. My name is Cam White. If you don't know me already, I'm a professional astrologer. Been doing this 8 years, done over like 2,000 consultations. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about Neptune and Aries, but we're going to be talking about a very specific part of it. Now, quick, asterisk warning on this. We'll go into the warnings, but I'm having some technological issues. And so this is going to be you're going to see me kind of like figure out how to put this presentation in the video out. Is it just me, or is Jupiter and Gemini felt like a really big Mercury retrograde? I'm having so many Mercury retrograde issues right now. It's crazy. But anyway, the reason I'm making this video is Neptune's going into Aries. It's a really big deal. I've talked a lot about it on things like the Civil War video I did, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction video I did, and you're going to be seeing me talk a lot about this. And the one theme that I keep going back to is war. Aries rules the sign of war. Neptune going into it. Literally the day after the last civil war in America started was the day Neptune ingressed into Aries the last time. Now, there's kind of, it's not going to look exactly like it did in the 1860s. However, there's some stuff that I have found on my research when looking into this that I think is really helpful. And specifically in this video, I want to go over some of that stuff. So let's go ahead and begin. Give me, like I said, I'm doing my best here to put this up. So let's see, Keynote, and then it should be this one. There we go. All right. So this video is titled Neptune and Aries, the Fog of War and Fifth Generational Warfare. So before we begin, this is a litmus test. If you didn't eat breakfast yesterday, how would you feel? There's only a small percentage of you that are going to understand that question and why I'm asking it, but that is a small litmus test into getting into this discussion. And we have some more rules. One of the things I want to bring up is I was looking up quotes on deception because Neptune's one of Neptune's main qualities is deception. Memory is deceptive because it is colored by today's events. Interesting. That's going to become a big theme as we keep continuing talking. So back to the rules of this presentation, because this is really important. I only want a certain type of person to be consuming this content, simply because it's for my own sanity and for the sanity of everybody else. I believe you can be that person. I believe anyone can be any person, but it's up to you to decide to be that person. So the type of person I'm looking for is capability of critical thinking of what you think is real. You have to be the critical thinker. You have to question what you think is real, okay? And I'm not saying this to call you out or to make you feel lesser than. I'm saying this because this is an important part of this discussion. Neptune is about obfuscation. Neptune is about confusion and illusion. To think that what we're going to be discussing is super evident and clear, or again, for other people, this might just all be conspiracy theories. Well, let's just move forward and I'll explain a little bit about that. Also, you have to have the capability of suspending your perceived political reality. Really big emphasis on perceived political reality. Even if you think you are in the camp, which no matter what side you're on, if you think you are in the right camp, I still want you to suspend that. Just for this, I want everyone here to leave their identities and their labels out the door. And we can sit here as human beings and digest this. There is no us versus them. There is no, we're the good guys, we're the bad guys. The analogy I wanted to use for this is I live pretty close to Rocky Stadium here in Denver. And I tried to do some research on this for this analogy. I couldn't find any in-depth info, so this is kind of an assumption, but Rockies fans pay the same price for a ticket as opposing teams' fans do. So let's say you're a Pirates fan and you're in Denver. You're going to say that you're going to pay the same price as a Rockies fan would. Why is that important? If you think you will be treated better because your perceived team will win, you are wrong. We all lose. The reason I'm making this video is, again, this goes with the theme of the World War III, Civil War stuff that's going on, and you're going to see why I'm bringing this up. But just because you are on a team that you think is supporting you, you're mistaken. We all lose in terms of what team we think we're on. You ever heard that saying, like, the left wing and the right wing are just on the same bird? The boot of authoritarianism stomps on all citizens, and you are not special, even if you love the boot. And that goes for the left and right. So I'm going to just quickly go over this, and you're going to understand why I'm opening up with this as we go on. But this is a really important thing to just kind of set out as context. So let's go over some lies. First, starting off with a quote from 1984. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. Let's use an analogy here. The government lies about a lot of stuff, but they're telling the truth about this. Okay, a little bit more context of where we're going here. We're going to just quickly go over this because a lot of this stuff is what we already know. I pulled some quotes from an article from, I think it's the Delineation Times. I have the source here later on. But let's just talk a few of the lies about the war in Iraq. Today it is widely accepted that there was no collaboration between Iraq and al-Qaeda regarding the 9/11 attacks. The 9/11 Commission report confirmed that there was no evidence of a collaborative relationship between the two. The second lie was that Iraq was an imminent threat to the United States and had weapons of mass destruction. Despite the overwhelming evidence that Iraq did not possess weapons of mass destruction, the U.S. government continued to push this narrative to justify the invasion and killing 1 million Iraqis. The U.S. intelligence community was pre-war assessments were also flawed and relied on unreliable sources, including forged documents. The third lie was the U.S. had evidence that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. This was a claim that was used to justify the invasion, but after the war, it was revealed that there were no WMDs in Iraq. The fourth lie was that the U.S. needed to invade Iraq to protect America. This claim was used to gain public support. Listen to that for a minute. This claim was used to gain public support for the war, but it has been widely criticized for its lack of evidence. The fifth lie was the U.S. had the support of the international community for the invasion of Iraq. The U.S. did not have the support of the United Nations Security Council, and several countries opposed the invasion. Again, this is from the Delineation Times, and it's titled 20 Lies About the Iraq War. Very interesting read. Other examples that I think we all know what I'm talking about here, but for the sake of my own channel here, we're just going to kind of talk about it as if we know. It came from a bat. You don't need to wear a mask. You do need to wear a mask. It was only 2 weeks. It's safe and effective. You will not get it and you will not spread it. And then this article came out. For some of you might have seen this. This is from The Telegraph, which is definitely not a very right-wing source from the UK. And it says, oh, there was just so happened something, again, I'm censoring my own words here for my own safety, may have helped fuel rise in excess deaths. Yeah, there was a lot of excess deaths in 2021 and 2022 that weren't actually happening in 2020. Interesting. Yeah. So we all know about those, right? So we're just building some context here, right? Let's talk about the Cheeto man. I had to involve this GIF. I think any mewing Sigma Chad filter on Trump is just too funny. Trump was right. Russian collusion was a hoax. Good luck regaining public's trust. Why is this important? For 8 years, probably more than 8 years, we were told the president of the United States was installed by a foreign government and was paid off by this foreign government that happens to be our perceived biggest adversary. Think about that for a minute. This was a sitting president that we were told by the CIA, by your elected officials, that this was a rigged election, that our foreign hostile government of Russia put him in. There was all these trials, there was all these investigations, nothing. What else are they lying to him about? And the reason I bring this up is like, I've told people before, like, I'm a human being, I have political biases. Nowadays, I lean a lot more conservative, although I would never put myself in a Republican Party. But the reason I'm bringing this up is 2019 Cam White hated Trump. I believed everything that was said. But as I got more into the astrology and understanding the current times, you do a little bit more investigation on Trump. And you realize so many things were fabricated about him. Like, for example, did he pay off Stormy Daniels? Yeah. But how it was connected to campaign finance, and it was this felony, and now it's a 34-time felony. Well, before you just take that as truth, right? So from my left people that are actually left, you know, they call it a war in Palestine, but we all know what it actually is, correct? So why are we taking what this institution that we know lies about everything? Tell me one thing the government told any sort of truth about in the past 25 years. Name me one thing they told the truth about. They haven't. So why would we take everything at face value of what they're saying as truth and gospel about anybody? Another good example is, without going into the context, because we all know what the context is, I love this definition of this word. An insurrection is an organized attempt by a group of people to defeat their government and take control of their country, usually by violence. Organize is a really interesting precursor to this. Defeat their government is also an interesting precursor to this. Insurrection doesn't seem to involve federal, agents letting people into the government building. And also the other one is take control of their country, as well as usually by violence. The extreme right-wing people that love guns and stuff like that just decided to try to overthrow the government without any guns. Interesting. This is Cambridge definition, by the way. So the point has been made, right? I'm just trying to put a context here of like, hey, Neptune is a real thing. The archetype of Neptune is a real thing. It is deception. It is contortion. It is illusion. It is fantasy. It's a wee-wah. It's a wazoo, whatever that line from The Wolf of Wall Street is. The point has been made. We all get it at this point. So let's talk about Neptune and the sign of war. So Neptune, we all know, is about illusion, delusion, fantasy, myth. It obfuscates things. It confuses. It shimmers. It's grandiose, and it gives you rose-colored glasses of the world. This is important to understand as it goes into Aries. Aries is the first zodiac sign. It represents the spring, the beginning, but it's a Mars-ruled planet. Mars rules war. Mars, I'm pretty like Aries, A-R-E-S, I'm pretty sure like literally means war in like Greek or Roman or something like that. And I would not, I don't think, be making the association between Neptune and Aries and war had not the Civil War in America started the day Neptune ingressed. Within 24 hours of the Civil War starting, Neptune ingressed into Aries. I don't know if I'd be making that association, but it's one of those things where, as an astrologer and just a human being, our job is to look at repetitive cycles and patterns, right? We are pattern recognizing creatures. There's one, let's see what the second one is about. Astrology is often literal. That is something I have learned over the past few years. And that really seemed to become so much more evident in 2020. If you've watched any of my videos about, or any of my delineation videos about whatever, I've talked a lot about the lockdowns. The lockdowns were when Mars conjoined Saturn in Aquarius. It was so literal. Saturn rules governments, limitations, and restrictions. It moved into Aquarius, right? The sign of the people. And then Mars, which is like separation, also entered Aquarius and conjoined Saturn, which was like the government says, separate yourself from Aquarius, society, the people. It was quite literal. And ever since that day as an astrologer, and I think I could speak for a lot of astrologers, it's hard for us to look at some of these transits and not just interpret them in the most literal meaning of the word. So it's worth our time to explore what this might look like in the most literal sense. That's where fifth generational warfare comes in. One moment. I need to turn down my AC, and the way that this is set up, I cannot just pause this video. Give me 2 seconds. So fifth generational warfare. What's the hubbub? Well, let's meet S2 Underground. S2 Underground is a YouTuber in the tactical military LARP space. I did a live stream about Trump and the conviction and Project 2025. And, a comment I got on that video was someone was like, Cameron, because I talked about like, hey, don't be afraid. Don't be worried about anything. And of course, people are like, well, I'm going to be afraid because that's what's going to make me feel better. And you're a white man. So of course you don't have anything to be afraid about. Like, shut up. But someone commented, Cameron, if you're not afraid, why are you buying guns? Because I've talked about before, I got into guns. They're very fun, stuff like that. I want to explain 4 things real quick. Number 1, it's my God-given right. You European people can't comprehend such freedom, but it's my God-given right to be able to protect and defend myself. Number 2, it's constitutionally protected to do that. So it's constitutionally protected activities. Number 3, they're fun, they're cool. That's how I really got into them. But 4, as an astrologer, and I look into the future of events, I see there being a lot of war. I see there being a lot of violence in some capacity. My job is to see that and then, I don't want to say dilute, but like work through what does that actually look like? And the thing is, it's not going to look like Mad Max stuff. However, I want to be aware of what's going on. For example, you hear AI stuff going on, right? You hear Bitcoin stuff going on. So what do? You research more about Bitcoin and AI to understand it. That's what I did. I saw more war stuff going on, and I want to understand it more. Plus, they're trying to ban guns. I wanted to have them. And as I got into them, you end up getting into, just like, for example, you look up your birth chart on YouTube, all of a sudden you get my videos, right? You start learning all these other astrology things. It's the same thing with anything. You get into a little niche topic and then it expands into another universe. The reason I'm talking about this is what's very interesting about, let's say, the tactical military YouTube space is they provide a lot more context of what things will look like. And that's how I discovered this S2 Underground guy. We're going to watch a lot of this video of 5th generational warfare because he just has like he talks about like camouflaging through drones, how to like do thermal camouflaging, just like super niche, nerdy stuff, right? But I watched this video and it was the biggest black and white definition of what I think Neptune and Aries is going to look like. So what I want to do today is show you guys this is someone who's been in the military, who has a very advanced understanding of this. And all I'm doing here is being like, hey, people are already talking about Neptune and Aries without bringing up Neptune and Aries. I'm just connecting these 2 dots for you guys. So we'll be watching parts of this video. I really, really, really recommend watching the whole thing. I will, of course, have the link below. And again, understanding what war looks like in 2025, which is 5th generational warfare, is going to help us navigate the terrain of reality. Why is that important? Why does any of that matter? Is this on the next slide? It's not. I think I have it on one of these slides. When you understand what's going on and why things are happening, you're no longer going to be clutching your pearls. You are no longer going to be like, oh my God, there was a insurrection at the Capitol. And why is that important? Well, war is no longer great nation versus great nation, which he will explain. You and your mind and your heart and your soul are the battlefield. And that sounds woo-woo, right? That sounds like we're in a Star Wars movie. This is military doctrine. Fucking nations are literally preparing for war, if not already enacting war on your mind. This is not hocus pocus. This is military doctrine. This is not a game. So why I'm bringing this up is because you are the battlefield. They are looking for you. It's not, oh, we're going to go to, Russia, Ukraine, do whatever. It's we're going to dictate your emotions and your mind so then you take actions that can then, again, benefit whatever belligerent or country or corporation in their interest. This is not a joke. This is straight up military doctrine, and I'd rather just watch the video with you guys so you guys understand. But this is not woo-woo, oh, your mind is the battlefield, Neo. This is the Matrix. This is fucking written like This is what countries are legitimately doing. You should take that seriously. And this is why I opened up with all of the lies, because you need to be disillusioned by what you're being told. You need to think critically for yourself, because otherwise you are going to be a casualty in the battle. And the battle is literally your mind. So let's watch the video. Give me a second here while I get everything up. Like I said, the amount of tech issues I'm having is quite wild. All right, so let's do this. All right. So this is the video, the 5th generational warfare video. Let me double check that all the microphone stuff is going to be working.
World War I,
Okay, so it's all working. So we're going to start a couple minutes into it, and right now he's going over the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th generational warfare. And we're just going to be talking, we're just going to listen to what 3rd generation is and understanding 4th generation. And then as we get to the 5th generation, I'm going to be making a little bit more comments on it. So let's just kind of jump into the middle of 3rd generation warfare.
Mind arms warfare, the 3rd generation of warfare gives us World War II. But in the final days of World War II, a new war was building. The nuclear weapon and its use in combat was one of the most important events in human history. And as a result, the Cold War developed. Conflict in an atomic age in which conflicts existed but took the form of proxy wars. This is when technological developments changed the nature of warfare yet again. This is the era of stealth instead of using brute force, using precision-guided munitions instead of carpet-bombing campaigns. Remember, we're still in the 3rd generation of warfare, still in the World War II mentality for conflicts like Korea, the Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf War, and even the later Iraq War. The 3rd generation of warfare encompasses the winning hearts and minds concepts we know all too well. New toys like stealth bombers and satellites changed a lot, but the end goals and the strategy used to achieve those goals was very similar as to how the majority of World War II was fought. But one of these wars is not like the other, again hinting at the academic squabbling that occurs when trying to define these things. So to explain that, let's jump to the 4th generation of warfare. The 4th gen of warfare can be defined in a single word: insurgency. And this is where things start becoming political, and the amateur historian starts running into some problems with the research. For instance, one of the first academics to talk about 4th generation warfare is William S. Lind. Lind, who is the most prolific writer on 4th gen warfare, even has his Wikipedia page slathered with politics. We see that on his own page he is defined as a conservative. Why does that matter if we're talking about warfare doctrine? He is defined by his politics first and his work second.
No, that's going to be important for a minute.
And scrolling down the page under the criticism section, we have the very first complaints from the Southern Poverty Law Center. So yeah, there you go. Can't really get any reliable information from Wikipedia anymore, an idea which is thick with irony considering the topic. Interestingly enough, it looks like most of his criticism comes from him linking his thoughts on warfare doctrine to cultural Marxism, which explains everything. Can't talk about communism or Marxism in today's world or point out its problems without being labeled as a far-right extremist, which is exactly what seems to have happened here too. But anyway, if you dig deep enough, you will find one of Lind's thoughts on 4th gen warfare, in which he defines it as when the state loses its monopoly in war. He goes on to say that all over the world, state militaries find themselves fighting non-state opponents such as Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Almost everywhere the state is losing. 4th generation warfare is also marked by a return to a world of cultures, not merely states, in conflict. We now find ourselves facing the Christian West's oldest and most steadfast opponent, Islam. Of course, Lind wrote...
The reason I'm also including this part is it's going to be better to understand 5th generation as you kind of understand what 4th generation is. And if you're not familiar with what an insurgency is, insurgent groups are like Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, ISIS, things like that.
Context of speaking about the then current U.S. wars in the Middle East, but the interesting thing to note is that these wars have been occurring for a long time. Like I mentioned when explaining 3rd gen warfare, there is a bit of academic squabbling that goes on. For instance, take the Vietnam War. Here you have a conflict that exhibits two styles of warfare. In the years since, Vietnam has become the infamous poster child for that deadly I word, insurgency. A disturbing number of people do not know that the Vietnam War was far more conventional than we think. We think the word Vietnam and images of the Viet Cong come to mind. U.S. soldiers patrolling through the jungles and getting ambushed around every corner. But there was this thing called the North Vietnamese Army, which was a legitimate conventional military force. No one knows about this more than the military aviation communities. Entire generations of military aviators have been trained with doctrine developed from the forgotten air war of Vietnam. The entire concept of the wild weasels and the doctrine of the suppression of enemy air defenses is a massive part of modern warfare, from Iraq to Bosnia to right now in Ukraine. But at the same time, the conventional third-generation war was raging in North Vietnam. In Cambodia and Laos, some dudes in black pajamas were defining the fourth generation of warfare. Which at last brings us to the fifth generation of warfare. And here's where we start running into problems again, because academics cannot agree on whether or not fifth generation warfare even exists. Up until this moment, warfare has been defined by what some have called the theory of sequential emergence, which is just a fancy way of saying that the first generation of warfare led to the second, and the lessons learned during the second gen led to the third, and so on. Daniel Abbott came up with this graphic, which indicates that the generations of war build upon one another and exist at the same time. Each progressive generation of warfare does not totally replace the generation before it, but rather builds on it, which allows for lesser developed styles of warfare to exist and be conducted at the same time. In other words, if your primary military operation is counterinsurgency, you can still have conventional third or even second generation conflicts occurring simultaneously. But the fifth generation of warfare seems to break this mold. It seems like most people who talk and argue about fifth generation warfare are at least united on one thing. Fifth gen warfare does not really adhere to this progressive generation model. So let's address some of these theories and try to piece together what fifth generation warfare actually is. Like I mentioned, most academics sort of agree on the first four gens of warfare, however that's where the similarities end. A few academics, such as William Lind, have stated that the fifth gen of warfare is really just a collection of tactics that should be nestled under the fourth or even third generation of warfare, so it really doesn't have a definition as a separate field of warfare. Which makes sense because he's the guy who literally wrote the book on 4th gen warfare. Remember, history is written by humans which have opinions, make mistakes, and have other faults. That's why history lies in the heart of the debate, and why we need to crack open another book. If we take a look at Daniel Abbott's book, adequately titled The Handbook of 5th Generation Warfare, he states that 5th Gen warfare is a war of information and perception, which sounds about right, but that's a really broad definition, but we'll come back to that in a moment. Others, such as the U.S. Air Force, see 5th Generation warfare as simply an extension of the air war. They see it as a sensor problem, and that a military aircraft that is capable of waging 5th Gen warfare will have certain sensors, communication suites, and other various electronics and capabilities to operate in highly contested battle spaces. Not quite what we're going for, is it? This is great and all, but not really what we're talking about with regards to 5th Generation warfare itself. This is defining the 5th generation of fighter aircraft, which is not the same thing. But this is important to note, because the term 5th generation was first coined in this context, which is why a lot of military strategists think of 5th generation warfare in terms of technology or sensors, which is again not the right way to think about it. In fact, the People's Liberation Army of China figured this out a long time ago.
This is where things shift.
In 1999, a book, or really rather a white paper, which became highly controversial throughout the defense community in the early 2000s, two colonels of the People's Liberation Army wrote a book called Unrestricted Warfare, in which they examined this topic, particularly in the context of a conflict with the West. In their book, they state that what we are referring to are not changes in the instruments of war, the technology of war, the modes of war, or the forms of war. What we are referring to is the function of warfare. So,
why I think that is really an important note is not only are we having Neptune ingress into Aries, we're having a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. When I had SJ on my channel a while ago and we talked about Saturn-Neptune conjunctions in Aries and Russia and stuff like that, what's hard about going back throughout history is the difference between the year 500 and the year 1600 was not a lot. The difference between 1900 and 2025 is extreme. So finding these perfect analogous situations where we could see history repeat is much more difficult when we live in a reality of accelerationism, when we live in a reality where progressive technology just goes farther and farther and farther, and now we're at that exponential point of rapid growth. It's like compounding interest. It takes a little time, but then as you have more, it just explodes. But the function of warfare is a really important definition to highlight for this topic.
And this hints at the 5th generation of warfare not simply being a new sequential progression of war. This is also noted in a very short paper published by the think tank 360 ISR, which mentions that we are no longer fighting a defined adversary in a defined battle space for a defined period of time. Instead, the 5th generation mission space is a continuous global battle of narratives that will play out over both virtual and physical space and encompass a range of violent and non-violent actions and effects.
Did you hear that? We're no longer fighting a defined adversary in a defined battle space or for a defined period of time. Instead, 5th generation mission space is a continuous global battle of narratives, of stories, of propaganda. That's what Neptune is really good at too. That will play out over both a virtual and a physical space. That's really important to know, and encompasses a range of violent and non-violent actions and events. Think about that. A non-violent action is considered a part of this new version of warfare. And again, the reference he has here is literally a book on 5th generation warfare.
Pretty solid definition of 5th generation warfare. However, we again are reading this from a perspective of nation-state warfare. This paper goes on to say that nations will seek to defend their borders through the extension of military influence. Examples include the deployment of double-digit SAMs and Iskander missiles in Kaliningrad, or the buildup of defenses on hitherto uninhabited islands in the South China Sea. Therefore, the experiences and lessons of 3rd and 4th generation warfare still have great utility. Militaries still need to maintain and develop the capability to defeat a more traditional adversary in a technologically complex environment. All of this I would agree with in the context of a nation-state's concerns with the changing nature of warfare. It makes a lot of sense for defense officials to think along these lines. However, I'm not a cadet writing term papers at West Point, and though the two topics are heavily linked by the very nature of 5th generation warfare itself, we here are more concerned with the civilian implications of this changing style of warfare, especially considering that it is in the civilian space that this war is being fought. And here the elephant begins to appear in the room. This paper literally just stated that in a 5th generation war, we will not be able to define our adversaries. And by default, the other side of that coin is that we will not know who our allies are either. And
we have references of multiple military doctrines, essentially. Again, maybe it's not put in law, but we have books on this saying, you will not be able to define who your adversary is. And by contrast, meaning you will not be able to define who your ally is. Think about that for a moment. Right now, political divide, political division just seems like, oh, it's so apparent. It's left versus right. Is it? Because I've made this comment before. You know, you think it's left versus right until you're like, let's say you're a leftist, you're with a group of leftists, and then let's say you're a leftist and someone's like, oh, but I support Israel. Whoa. We might be seeing different sides of an equation now. You know, let's say you're on the right too, and you might bring up again, like they, you know, defend Israel, but you're like pro-Palestine. And then it's this idea that it's just left versus right that's going away very soon. And you're not going to be able to define who your friend or foe is. And think about that. That's not like just the propaganda getting so crazy. This is a warfare tactic. Like these books are not like, oh, like here's maybe what that looks like. It's like, this isn't like because what ends up happening is, for example, the US military will make like doctrine, for example, on like camouflage. And a lot of that stuff will end up becoming public, and then other nations conform to that. Like especially because US really runs NATO. NATO is going to conform to their standards and principles and things like that. This isn't like this is what happened. And again, this is all stuff that came out years ago that has been implemented. So let's keep watching.
We begin to plant the seed of what very few academics want to talk about. U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Stanton Coer got a little closer to what we're trying to get at in the Marine Corps Gazette from January 2009. He takes a more boots-on-ground approach to describing the symptoms of a fifth-generation warfare. He writes that the battlefield will be something strange, cyberspace, or the Cleveland water supply, or Wall Street's banking systems, or YouTube. The mission will be instilling fear, and it will succeed.
This is a big reason why I've been like, I'm a human being. I look into this stuff. Like, there's a part of me that gets worried, right? Like, who wouldn't? But this is another reason why I've been so big about, like, you can't be in fear. And it's really frustrating. And you know, if I could be just straight up offensive, I think it shows a lot of weakness and a lack of spine from a lot of people. When, like, I went live and it's just like, oh, when you hear about the Supreme Court doing this and this and that, don't worry. And people are like, well, Cameron, you're a straight white man. You have nothing to be afraid about. Even though, again, you know, you little sissy lalas would stay at your house. I would be the one getting drafted and get some sort of 7.62 round blown through my brain somewhere in Eastern Europe. I have nothing to worry about, right? I'm a straight white guy. I totally wouldn't be first in line for the draft. It's not that you don't have anything to worry about. You can worry about anything. You can worry about getting Ebola. You can worry about being struck by lightning. You can worry about getting hit by a car, but you don't, do you? What kind of life is worth living where you choose to sulk in fear? Now, riddle me this. When fear is the main tactic of war, the biggest punk thing you can do is to be not afraid. The biggest fuck you can give to the system is to not live in fear. Think about that for a minute. And don't give me this bullshit of like, oh, well, you know, I'm black and trans, so you don't understand what's at risk of me. That's not what it's about. You have every reason to justify your fear. But what kind of life are you living? And that's also what they want you to do. Think about this too, with the same thing with Project 2025. The Project 2025 is the big boogeyman right now everyone's talking about, which, by the way, name me a president in the past 40 years that has done anything remotely close to what they promised. Name me one. And also, Trump is not a part of Project 2025. I was listening to Tim Pool, and he made a really good point. He's like, I think it's the Heritage Foundation that put out Project 2025, and Trump's not associated with it, right? That would be like if Planned Parenthood put out their agenda for what the Biden administration is going to do. Like, okay, there might be like some sort of consensus on things, but Planned Parenthood doesn't have any control of what the Biden administration is going to do. Like, the Heritage Foundation is just like a conservative think tank. But that's the new boogeyman. They want you to be scared because, again, they want you to vote for the geriatric guy, Biden, who lied to you, didn't promise you anything, all that kind of good stuff. And again, you want to vote for Biden on your own course, by all means, go for it. But understand why. Are you voting for him because you believe in his policies, he's done good? If that's the case, that's you. Or is it fear? Are you being used as a pawn for fear? Think about that. Because that's no longer like oh, you're being used as a pawn, man. Wake up, Neo from the Matrix. This is straight up warfare. That was written in 2009. Think about that. It was almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago. The mission will be instilling fear, and they will succeed. I don't want them to win. The way that you don't let them win is you not being afraid. You having the awareness of what's going on when you see things to be scared about. Think for a minute. Why? Sure, part of it might be to get more views up. Sensational content gets a lot more views and clicks and more ad revenue. But think about it from another layer. We have the planet of media and fantasy and illusion going into the sign of war. Think about that. It's easy to talk about it without actually applying it into what that looks like in your day-to-day life. Not to mention, which we'll get into this as we move on, it's not just Neptune moving into Aries. It's Pluto in Aquarius and Uranus in Gemini. We are going to be living in a world where America isn't the big player anymore. A multipolar world. Pluto is, again, like corruption and transformation and mass death, and it's going to the sign of the people for 20 years. And then Uranus going into Gemini, it's just like, it's always war for America. Again, 1776, the 1860s, the World War II. We're getting into war. All right. You know how I said earlier, Jupiter in Gemini has been fucking with my Wi-Fi? Or maybe I said that in my Mercury retrograde video. There we go. My Wi-Fi went out for a second, so this should be coming back up. But anyway, I really want you to think about this. We have a few more minutes to watch, so sorry. This is taking a while.
Colonel idea is a common one among fifth-generation warfare theorists, and one that you often see online by various websites claiming that fifth-generation warfare is simply a war of propaganda or a war for your mind or something like that. And I think that that simple definition is quite accurate, but not totally. Remember, the tactics used in warfare sometimes do not reflect and are oftentimes counterintuitive to the end goal. For instance, psychological warfare uses various means to get a person to think a certain way about something. But is that the final goal?
Is it?
No, the final goal is to get a person to act a certain way. Actions are more devastating than thoughts in warfare, but since thoughts lead to actions, we see a lot of tactics being used to affect thoughts. So all of this considered, we can cobble together a rough list of some characteristics.
You know, I think it's interesting too where you're talking about actions. They're like, how can we deceive? How can we manipulate your thoughts to turn them into actions? And I just think that's really interesting for Neptune in Aries.
Of fifth-generation warfare as it applies to civilian and military communities alike. First up is mass cyber attacks not attributable to an actor or a nation state.
Think about that. Think about that for a second. Mass cyber attacks that are not attributed to an actor or a nation state. There's just a cyber attack. I think it was Massachusetts where Boston 911 was down for a long time. And it was like, just like their firewall did something weird. Have you noticed how many cyber attacks have gone on this year? That you never heard about before. That was never, ever, ever a big deal before. Pluto moved into Aquarius, in my opinion.
Kind of easy. As many people have stated over the years, the impact of cyber warfare on everything will be extremely significant. Very little has been done over the years to combat the rising threat of technologies on our critical infrastructure. We have already found the vulnerability of somewhat invulnerable SCADA systems when it comes to POL, or petroleum, oil, and lubricant production, and the massive waves of cyber attacks at the commercial and at the consumer levels have proven the vulnerabilities in these areas as well. Very, very little can be done about cyber attacks at the consumer level, especially considering the interconnected nature of everything these days. But we will address this when we talk solutions. So this characteristic is pretty short. Just think Matrix-level cyber stuff that you have no idea where it's coming from. A major part of fifth-generation warfare, but still pretty easy to think about. Something a little more complex is mass social engineering, which if conducted...
What? Mass social engineering? You mean like, I don't know, Pluto and Aquarius? I don't know, maybe.
A nation state, this social engineering might be conducted on their own citizenry. Again, this is not a surprising tactic. As societal norms and skills change, social engineering becomes a much more significant threat than in years past. Some could make the argument that people today are simply more stupid than in years past, so social engineering works quite well, whereas people in the past would never fall for the social engineering tricks of today. While I myself fight the urge to agree with the cognitive decline of modern societies and cultures, I begrudgingly admit that it's not as simple as people being stupid in our modern world. What's more accurate is that people in today's world are vulnerable to social engineering that is different from people in the past. Our modern world has made many comparisons to the past akin to comparing apples and oranges, which is something that militaries, nation-states, and especially non-state actors have taken note of. And that's why social engineering is a critical tool for waging a fifth-generation war. Another attribute of a fifth-generation war is that conflict will exhibit a lack of us versus them nature. Rather, the conflict itself is often observed to be spontaneous. Much like with cyber attacks, kinetic actions, when they do occur in a 5th generation war, are often seemingly random since we cannot observe the lead up to the conflict. Conflagrations might pop up over a social event, and might even be egged on by silent actors who seek to capitalize on the destabilization.
Think about that. There's no us versus them. This could be a social event where, again, people egg on something and people can profit off of the destabilization. Think about that in terms of when you project onto other people, because that's what we do, right? Like it's just a human trait. It can be good, it can be bad. But when you look at someone and you only hold them in your perceived political reality and you project onto them, they are your enemy. When you hold everyone to this high standard of morality that if it differs in any variation from yours, they must be evil, you will find yourself alone. You will find yourself without an ally, and everyone is your foe. I bring this up because this is the reality that we have to navigate for a while. I think Neptune will be in Aries for about like 12 to 15 years. So we've got a while to navigate this. And I think it's best now that we have an incredible sense of nuance with how we navigate our anger, our actions. Now that everything is media, your phone, your computer, all we're doing is consuming media, and now the planet of media is going into the sign of war and actions. Ask yourself, why are you doing something? Was that you, or were you influenced? And at what degree were you influenced? We all get influenced to do something, right? But at what degree, and where did that influence come from?
Let a good crisis go to waste, right? But the conflicts that do occur will not look like your normal conflicts of the past. You might have some actors strike back against an adversary by targeting a third-party group. To the bystanders, this will make no logical sense, but to the belligerents, this makes perfect sense in the context of a 5th generation war that does not play by the classic us versus them mentality. That's a lot of funny words, so what does this mean in plain English? Well, due to how globalization has severely warped our logistical networks, it means to get ready for some weird stuff. Russia invades Ukraine? Well, we're going to fight back by pouring out government-purchased alcohol that taxpayers already paid for. Medical tyranny no longer working? Congratulations, physically exercising at home is now white supremacy.
Think about that for a minute, because like for a lot of people, this isn't a big deal, but it really is. Like medical, this is what I love. I always love bringing up the hypocrisy of the left-right divide, because everyone really agrees on everything, but they just like think that they don't. We got like left people are like, there's medical tyranny. There's, like, why can't I have free healthcare? And the right people are like, well, I don't want to put, and stuff in my body. And so it's like when you take care of your health, that's looked at as like far right-wing Nazi stuff. But then you have people supporting being fat and overweight and being a slave to the pharmaceutical industries and to the not free healthcare system.
Our economy is failing? Oh, I know what will fix it. Putting uniformed U.S. soldiers in elementary schools. Of course, a lot of these examples are more accurately explained by the state seeking to increase their influence and control over the American people rather than the strange nature of 5th generation warfare, but you get the point. At the end of the day, this illustrates the complexity and the self-fulfilling nature of a 5th generation war. School teachers start teaching extreme political ideology and utter perversion in schools, which makes parents upset, which makes the DOJ upset, and they start labeling parents as terrorists, which makes the parents even more livid and brings people who don't even have kids into the fray, along with social movements, which impacts the economic sector and brings in career politicians with their own egotistical and tyrannical goals. So now you've got a multi-front war going on, which just keeps churning on its own because everyone is fighting everyone else, and all originating from a single point of origin.
That's the whole thing too. Like, why are you like, it's amazing to me how much people are infighting and arguing about everything. Like, for example, I made this point on like the Trump conviction video. It's like, if I don't literally lay on the ground and throw a temper tantrum like I'm a 7-year-old kid who can't get my box of cereal I want and proclaim that Trump is the devil, I literally get hundreds of comments calling me this crazy MAGA person, right-wing conspiracy theory Nazi. It's like, get a fucking life. You are being a pawn. There's the same thing with people on the right when they get upset about everything woke. It's like, no fucking shit, everything's woke. No, like, it's how they gain the control. Again, like, something I get upset about is like, you know, for example, there's a lot of homelessness, crime in Denver. They don't do anything about it, right? Well, that gets me to be like, well, like, why don't you just fucking throw them in jail? And then I go like, well, that's dumb, because then now I'm allowing authoritarian, like, you know, policies to be implemented because they're allowing this because that's what they want me to do. It's really fucked up, isn't it? But you guys have to supersede and suspend your politically perceived reality, because it's all a part of a bigger story. They want you infighting with everyone. They want you to hate your fucking neighbor. Like, that's what I can't stand. Especially in terms of the astrology community, because so many are so fucking lost in the sauce. You guys are so lost in the sauce. Anybody that is, again, not an absolute Marxist is just the fucking Nazi. And it's really ridiculous. Like, some of you are such children, and some of you have responsibilities, and it blows my mind that you guys are put in any sort of position of responsibility when you look at everyone else as if it's black and white. Like, I'm the good guy and everyone else who doesn't have my morality is bad. You're being used. At what point do you get sick of wasting the finite resource of your energy and time on hating your neighbor, on hating someone else that you don't even know what their beliefs are? You have no idea what they think or believe, but because you think they say one thing, it's like, for example, like I said one thing on one of my videos, and just someone's like, that sounds actually like maybe really MAGA. Cameron, are you MAGA? It's just like, what? Again, like, what? Like, shut the fuck up. This is why I don't even like talking about the political stuff. And again, not everyone's going to agree with my political opinion, and I'm not trying to put a political opinion out here. This is just what's happening. But it's hard to understand what's happening when you're only looking at it through the television and what the TV tells you to think. You have to, again, you're allowed to be on the left. You're allowed to be on the right. You're allowed to have certain values and morals. In my opinion, no one's values and morals are no better than anyone else's, because that's all about perspective, culture, history, long story short. And that's not any of your business to figure out whose morality is higher. What, though, I think is your job is asking yourself, why am I getting worked up about this? Why can I not let other people have their opinion or how they see things? Like, I love when people are like, we have to, like, you know, like in the last election, I think it was like, what, 77 million people voted for Trump? You think half of this country is like right-wing terrorists? You think half of this country are Nazis and white supremacists? You think half of the people here are that? Like, are you stupid? Are you fucking retarded? Sure, there's people with bad opinions. I see them all the time. We all see them. But you really think half of this country supports a white supremacist because they're white supremacists? You really think that? Like, again, if you didn't eat breakfast yesterday morning, how would you feel? That's what I'd ask. Let's keep watching. We have a few more minutes of this. Don't worry, we're almost done.
Linked to the next point, which is that non-state actors are becoming primary belligerents. Another main character.
This is also a left part of thing, in my opinion. He's going to bring up the World Economic Forum, but he just said non-state actors are becoming primary belligerents, which means not countries.
War that separates it from even fourth generation war is the nature and power of non-state actors. And no, we're not talking about a terror group or cell. That's covered in fourth generation warfare. Remember, 4G warfare is insurgencies, right? Fifth generation warfare takes it to another degree by including private companies. Just look around the world today and we can make some pretty interesting observations with regards to so-called private companies and their relationship with other non-state actors or even the state itself. I know that we keep harping on the Biden regime, but this is actually a very fascinating example of the unique nature of the relationship between private companies and a nation-state in a 5G war. For instance, a lot of people have noticed the extremely overwhelming support from private companies to protect the Biden regime, even when the Biden regime didn't really explicitly ask for it. A great example of this is the media, and again, it's utterly fascinating. Right now, it's pretty obvious that the Biden regime is directing all mainstream media sources at some point. They've openly admitted to such in the past. But it's not total control. It's influence the regime wants, remember? There is not a White House representative sitting in MSNBC's studio directing the show. No, we now live in a world of fact-checkers who have been delegated the power to broadcast propaganda and push content that supports the regime. Sometimes they guess right, and sometimes they accidentally go against the regime. Thus, the thousands of news articles that have been changed, this is a major part of fifth-generation warfare. Not necessarily the propaganda itself, but how private companies will seek to prop up nation-states and political regimes with fervor that even the regime themselves thinks is surprising. In a traditional political structure, or even a traditional dictatorship, you would think that propaganda is directed from the top down, that the nation-state is totally controlling and directing their media organizations. But there's the difference in a 5G war. It might be the other way around. Governments themselves might be the ones with the training wheels, and private companies the ones with their hands on the seat saying good job. Obviously, this is not the case everywhere, but the bottom line is that in a fifth-generation war, the nation-state is no longer the big dog in town. And due to all of the information warfare that is also present in a fifth-generation war, governments might not even know that they aren't top dog in certain circumstances. That's why people are now talking a lot about the New World Order and other similar stuff in the open now, because it's quite plain to see that there are non-state organizations, entities, and lines of effort that appear to be transnational.
He's going to bring up the World Economic Forum, but I can't help to think about, I think it's the Heritage Foundation that is launching Project 2025. That is just a think tank. I don't think it's government funded. You know what? Let's double check. Because I might be wrong about that. I don't know. Let's see. Is Heritage Foundation government funded? Heritage is a tax exempt 501c3 organization and BBB-wise Giving Alliance, accredited charity funded by donations from private individuals, corporations, and charitable foundations. It is not required to disclose its donors and donations under the current laws that guide taxable deductions. So it's just like a 501c3. Is it Heritage Foundation? Yeah, the Heritage Foundation is doing Project 2025. Yeah. So I would consider that part of it.
The World Economic Forum more powerful than a nation-state? I don't know. I guess it would depend on the nation-state. I think that that organization specifically is not some kind of James Bond Spectre group, despite the fact that they desperately want to be. I think they're just another player and interest group on the board of globalization. They might want to be the puppet masters of the world, but they're still fighting to achieve that goal just like everyone else. The Great Reset being their front line in this global fifth-generation war. Of course, this is all debatable, but what is certain is that these guys and other non-state actors like them wield a lot of influence. And though their success is not explicitly guaranteed, their mere existence is exactly the type of thing that you would expect to see in a fifth-generation war.
Okay, so this is the last part I want to watch with you guys. And there's a few things to go into, and then we'll close this out. But like I said, I'd really recommend watching this whole video.
Another unfortunate characteristic of a fifth-generation war is nation-states or powerful actors possessing the wrong tools for the job. In other words, nation-states will fight the fight that fits one's weapons. The United States has built a military centered around fighting insurgencies, and though the pivot back to a more traditional near-peer fight has become more pressing following the Pacific pivot to counter China, and even the current Ukrainian war, the fact of the matter is that the U.S. is best equipped to fight insurgencies. So it is an insurgency they will fight, even if that is not the right tool for the job. This is kind of linked to what I was talking about when it comes to the lack of an us versus them nature, right? You're going to have nation states or powerful actors or non-state actors fighting against each other. It's not really like a proxy war situation. It's more like an innocent bystander or a non-affiliated group or society gets impacted by this conflict seemingly out of nowhere, but due to the 5th generation warfare model, it kind of makes sense. Like China is getting handsy in the South Pacific, or the insurgencies are kicking up in North Africa again, or Russia has invaded Ukraine. Well, the solution to that is launch a counterinsurgency mission here in the U.S. Like that's kind of like the way we're going to see this being manifested. Remember, ever since the military occupation of Washington...
That's the really important part, too. And he's going to dive into that a little bit more, but how much everything around the world is going on, yet there's so much focus on Americans. Think about that.
You see in the days leading up to and the months after the 2020 inauguration, the United States government has increasingly leaned on skills, technology, and doctrine that was learned and developed during the global war on terror. It might not be as simple as, like, Russia invading Ukraine, and the U.S. can't do anything about that, so we're going to target our own people because that's what we know how to do. It's not really that simple, but it sure seems like it. Tactics like crowd control, checkpoints, aerial surveillance, and urban warfare have already been weaponized against the American people. In short, the U.S. military is already a mile down the dangerous path of treating the National Mall like Baghdad, and treating American citizens like Iraqis. Of course, this is not happening everywhere just yet, but the fact that it happened in the first place breaks the illusion that it can't happen. And the undisputed...
That was a huge thing for me, too, with January 6th, was when I saw how militarized DC was, I was like, oh, like that point of like that, it broke the illusion that it couldn't happen. I think the other part of that, too, is when I was living in LA in 2020, during the protests, there was National Guard troops on like every corner. That was, I don't know how to describe it, but just really weird to see how many soldiers were boots on the ground in Los Angeles.
Fact, the undeniable reality that we have already seen certain states using armed soldiers to set up checkpoints on highways and checking the identity papers of citizens. Well, I guess we are much closer to being treated like Iraqi citizens than we thought.
And for those that are going to be like, well, Cameron, we were in a pandemic. We needed to check people. Okay. Remember that when, let's say they want to ban abortion or whatever, or let's say you live in Texas and you want to get an abortion and you decided to drive to Colorado, but, Texas has National Guard on its borders, checking your IDs and your paperwork. And because you have a period tracker app, as well as, I don't know if you guys know anything about marketing, but there's like a really famous story about like people's shopping habits can like predict certain things. And it was something to do with like this one ad agency was able to predict that this woman was pregnant just by her shopping patterns. So when there's a lot of data that's driving you to, or that's showing that you are pregnant, but you want to get an abortion, you're leaving the state of Texas, and there's troops there, like, it's not okay to have troops on the ground to make sure that you can go and see your family. Like, I really hope people reckon with how much of the floodgates were let open with COVID, with the riots. Like, we let U.S. soldiers do checkpoints. That's insane. And when is the last time the government ever like did something kind of crazy and then they kind of walked it back because it was no longer needed? You still have to take your shoes off to go to the airport, and it hasn't stopped anything.
And since these comments will invariably result in a lot of discussion, let's briefly follow that rabbit hole a bit further. If all you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. And right now, the U.S. military, law enforcement, and federal agencies are the hammer, and the nail is the citizenry just trying to live their lives with as much freedom as possible, which is the antithesis of most political regimes, regardless of the political party. I know a lot of military folks out there might not want to hear this, because people do not want to think that they might be the bad guy. After all, most military service members sign up to do good things and serve their country. And for the men and women that are still dedicated to that, despite fighting a losing battle, Those service members should be an inspiration to us all. For those who are fighting back and actually living up to their oath, we have nothing but the highest respect. But from the civilian side of things, we have to acknowledge that some of their compatriots and most of their commanders and leadership do not have the same dedication to the oath they swore. Right now, there is a sort of reckoning within the U.S. military. There is an increasing number of people.
I'm going to pause it right here and just bring up something that he kind of goes into, and that is, let me fix this a little bit. Unfortunately, a lot of U.S. soldiers had to get an injection. And he brings up the really good point that if U.S. soldiers weren't willing to stand up to that, what other orders would they be not willing to stand up to? Think about that. So let's go ahead and go back to this. So in closing, hold on, dupe. Like I said, this is going to be a little difficult for me. There we go. Notes. Why did I start this presentation the way that I did? When you can see how clearly the U.S. government has lied in so many ways in the past, you cannot take anything they say as truth. And I've said this before. You're typically 9 times out of 10 safer believing the exact opposite thing that they want you to believe. It's worked out pretty well for me so far, to be honest with you, because a lot of the people that had questions about the things that happened in the past 4 years, we ended up being right. And a lot of people are still in denial about that, or they stopped learning anything after the year 2021, and they just decided to stay ignorant and be an ostrich with its head in the ground and not learn new information that was weaponized at first, but ended up being correct. The abusive relationship between Americans and their governments is a slippery slope. I feel like since 2001 is like the first time our significant other has hit us, and we have justified it. And since then, the violence on us has only gotten more and more. Using an analogy of like domestic violence. How much farther does it go until we say enough is enough? We have allowed such a degree of falsehood that we don't recognize what is real anymore, and it doesn't even matter. Memory is deceptive because it is colored by today's events. We don't remember how much they lied. We're too busy. What's today? Oh, we're too busy focusing on Project 2025. That's what today's hot button issue is, to remember that. They said that that disease came from a bat when actually we were manufacturing diseases in China. We totally lied about that. What else? Name me one thing that the government has told the truth about in the past 25 years. One thing. Doublethink means the power of holding two contradictory beliefs in one's mind simultaneously and accepting both of them. Why I'm ending on this is, again, you can't sit here and be like, yeah, the government lied about the Iraq war. That was really bad. And, they also lied about all these other things. And, they're also lying about what's going on in Palestine, but they're telling the truth about this. So how to navigate the landscape of Neptune and Aries. Are your ideas yours? Are they? And a good chance they're not. Like, that's the issue with this is like, it's like a cocktail. It's got to be a certain percentage. Are your actions your idea? Like, for example, we all get influenced by stuff. There's no way to not be influenced by whether it's your friend, your spouse, your family, social media. But why are you being influenced that way? Is it out of natural curiosity? Are you into it? And what actions are you taking, and how much of that was by your own will and by your own accord? Why do you care what others want you to think? I mean, I can answer that for you, and that's for social acceptance. We're tribal, by nature, and we want to be accepted by the tribe. But I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to agree on everything that the tribe says. So why are you caring about what others want you to think? Think for yourself. You will find yourself agreeing a lot of the times with a lot of people. And then also there will be times that you disagree with people, and that's okay. But I want you to think for yourself, and I don't want you to care what other people think. A lot of us wore masks in 2020 when we didn't actually fucking give a shit. It's not even that we were against it. We just didn't give a shit, but we did it anyway because we didn't want to be judged. And that's the power of that, right? Don't let propaganda influence your actions. And again, as much as I'd love to say, don't let propaganda influence your actions, it's much more of understand this is the current nature of everything. Like, the reason I'm making this video is when we understand what we're actually seeing and what we will continue to see is actually just warfare. It's not on a battleground. It's not soldiers lining up, pointing the rifles with one bullet and then the other side does the same thing. It's literally in your mind and manipulating you to take specific actions. It's in order to create fear and to have us all self-divided within this other stuff so that they can reign in control. And it's not even just the US government. It's things like, again, corporations, other nation states, insurgency groups. There's all of these different factors at play. And we have to navigate an extremely confusing battlefield. But when you see crazy stuff happen, the goal of this video was I want you to be like, oh, I don't need to, yes, is that an awful situation that happened? Yes. Is it bad people are dying in Ukraine? Yes. But you don't need to have this reaction, oh my God, we have to do something about it. It's like, this is all a bigger thing, and you need to be a strong soldier. You need to not let the battlefield of your mind be corrupted by the enemy. You need to be the strong soldier. You need to not live in fear. You need to be clear about what's going on and let all this other noise drown out. Eliminate anything that can alter your mind that doesn't allow you to tap into yourself. Straight up, on some real shit, I've said this a lot. I quit smoking weed. I don't really drink that much. Your mind and substances are a way to get into your mind. Eliminate things that aren't allowing you to tap into yourself. And that might even be anger. You're not actually angry. Everyone's full of love. The whole universe is love. Anger is just a weird expression of it. We're all under attack. We're all in this war together. That's what I loved about in 2020 in the grocery stores. And remember, we're all in this together. I'm like, it's kind of a weird, it's very true, but it's just in a different way. And your side doesn't win. We all just lose. That's what's going on here. Stop picking a side. Stop involving. And again, for all the people that say, Cameron, of course you can say that. You're a white man. You're privileged, blah, blah, blah. I am privileged. You have a privilege too. You can access that. But the more that you live in a victim mentality, and again, we're all victims. I've talked about this many times before. We've all had events where we were victimized by something and it wasn't fair. But if you continue to let that narrative play out, you are being used. And you're not even getting anything out of it. When you understand the battlefield, you no longer get caught up in the reaction as to what is happening, why it's happening. I think I made this point earlier. I forgot about this slide. When you understand what the battlefield is, you don't need to be worrying about everything that's going on because you understand what's going on. And that's why I'm trying to make this video. We're also caught up in everything that it's overwhelming us. And we don't need to. When you understand, oh, it's not just why is this person doing this or why is that? It's a much bigger, complex issue that I don't really think we even start seeing a close reality of what it means until 2027 when Saturn's starting to move out of Aries. The coming years will only become more reactionary. They will exploit your emotions and mind to react and create consensus for their actions. Again, have some critical thinking skills. Understand why you're feeling that reaction. You don't have to react. It's okay to feel, for example, if something again, when people I understand when people get upset about Palestine. I really do. But you going to college campuses and shutting down freeways to stop it is not going to stop the thing. And it's not. This isn't the Vietnam War where US is completely involved. This is two other countries completely at their own thing. And don't even get me started on that. You have to understand that your mind and your body is going to be exploited for all these other interests. And you are at war. That's my presentation for today. Let me know what you guys think. I understand this is just like everything else for the people that even make it here, that this is controversial. Not everyone's going to agree with me, But I at least want to know, because like I said, I don't want people being like, oh, well, you're a leftist and you're retarded and you're right, so you're an extremist. What I want you to comment is, what do you think about the idea of 5th generational warfare as Neptune and Aries? Because that's the thing that's stuck in my head right now, as like, oh, let's confuse the battleground. Let's make it an information war, again, along with Pluto and Aquarius and Uranus and Gemini and things like that. But that's what I got for you guys. Let me know your thoughts below. I'll be seeing you guys next time.